Hey class, so we're going to get started on chapter 22, the reproductive system. Today we're going to start out with the male reproductive system, and then the next class period we're going to do the female reproductive system. And I wanted to give you a heads up, Monday, April 20th will be exam 4, and that's going to be the fluid electrolyte acid-base balance chapter 21, chapter 13, the endocrine system, and then chapter 22, the reproductive system. The review sheet is up on D2L, so as always, I would start studying early and often for the exam. It will also be on mastering, just like last time. You'll have an opportunity to take the test anytime on the 20th, as long as it's finished by 11:59 p.m. And there will also still be a time limit on the exam, probably around 60 minutes, but I will let you know as we get a little closer exactly what time limit that is going to be. But let's get started today. Oh, other thing I wanted to mention on your daily checklist, there is going to be a link to SurveyMonkey to take a course survey. It is not the IDEA surveys that the college gives out. This is one that I created. It's anonymous, and I just wanted some feedback from you guys. So there's 9 questions. It should take you less than 2 minutes to finish it. But the first 3 questions are for how things have been going since spring break, since we've done this online stuff. Okay. The other few questions are for the class in general since the beginning of the semester. And then there's a place where you can put comments. And so if you want to do comments for a whole semester since spring break, just let me know what you're commenting about that. I'd like to get your feedback and just see how things are going since I can't see you guys or talk to you. But you're welcome to call me anytime if you have any questions or anything like that. Okay, so please take that survey. It literally will take you less than 2 minutes to fill it out. Okay, so chapter 22, the reproductive system. Let's see, get this pulled up here. Okay, so we're going to start out with the male reproductive system, but we're going to go through a little bit of an introduction first. As always, we're going to want to know the anatomy of the reproductive systems and also the physiology or their jobs, the functions of those systems. Okay, so anatomically speaking, we'll go over some specific structures, but both reproductive systems are basically a set of organs and glands. Okay, and we'll name those and talk about those as we go along. But their functions in general is to regulate and secrete hormones. And those hormones are going to regulate reproductive processes, production of egg and sperm, maintenance of pregnancy, and things like that. And then to also develop some of the secondary sex characteristics that are unique to men and unique to women. And so, like I mentioned, also nurture and also transport the sex cells to the site of fertilization. And so we'll be talking about how that goes as well. But so for right now, just circle that these are the functions. These are the main jobs of the male and female reproductive systems. And like I said, we'll get into those a lot more in depth as we go through. Okay, so another important introductory piece is to know what the male sex cells, or another name for that is gamete. What is the male gamete and what is the female gamete? You have to know that. The male sex cell or the male gamete is the sperm, and the female sex cell is what we call the oocyte, or that's a fancy word for egg. Okay, so you need to know what those are. And any gamete, whether it's a human or a cat or a horse or whatever, their gametes or their sex cells have one copy of genetic instructions. So human cells, like in an adult human cell, has 46 chromosomes. Okay, in the egg, there will be 23 chromosomes, and in the sperm, there will be 23 chromosomes. So when this egg and this sperm unite, the zygote or the offspring cell will then have 46 chromosomes. But to get this half number of chromosomes to produce the gametes, the cells have to undergo a process called meiosis. And you probably learned about that in junior high or high school, or even in, I think Dr. Morrow taught about it in A&P 1. Okay, it's basically getting the correct number of chromosomes to those particular gametes. And I'm not going to talk about mitosis and meiosis because I think if you want to, you can review a little bit about that. But just remember that meiosis has 2 rounds of division. It's for reproductive purposes. Mitosis is really for growth and repair, the purpose there. But if you want to review meiosis, you're welcome to, but I'm going to skip ahead into the next part of the chapter that looks at the reproductive organs in the male reproductive system. Okay, so specific to the male reproductive system, its functions is to produce and keep alive the sperm, to transport the sperm and its associated fluids, which makes up the semen, out of the body, okay, and help get it to the site of fertilization, and then also secrete the male sex hormones, which is going to drive the production of sperm and then keep those male characteristics in that individual. Now, so functions are going to be important to remember. Also, what are the gonads? Okay, a primary sex organ, and we also have secondary or accessory sex organs. You'll need to know which organs go with which category. The primary sex organ in a male is the testes. And of course, there are 2 of those, the testicles. Okay, they're going to produce the sperm cells and produce also the male sex hormone. Okay, so that's the primary male sex organ, the gonads. Everything else associated with the male reproductive system is an accessory organ. So just like we had in the digestive system, accessory organs like the pancreas and the liver that kind of helped out with digestion, all these accessory organs are going to help out with producing the semen, and transporting them and things like that. So there's going to be internal and external secondary or accessory organs. Example of that would be like the epididymis. That's Y, E-P-I. Sorry, can't spell. Epididymis. Still can't hardly read that, can you? Epididymis, or the prostate. Those are a couple of examples of internal accessory organs. Okay, so you'll have some activities where you'll be labeling the structures. Obviously, you're going to have to do that for the test and know where all of these structures are. We'll talk about most of these as we go through. So here is a good diagram here of what some of the male reproductive organs are. Let's start with something familiar. Here we have these 2 tubes coming down here. Those are the ureters that go into the bladder. So this hollow thing here is the bladder. And remember, the urethra serves 2 functions in the male. It's going to drain the bladder out of the body. And it's also going to serve a reproductive purpose and allow for the passage of sperm out as well. Okay, so I mentioned the prostate. This is the prostate organ here, sits right below the bladder, and it surrounds the urethra. These are what we call the seminal vesicles here that sit behind the bladder. There's a little gland here called the bulbourethral gland, or the Cowper's gland. The epididymis is this structure here that sits on top of the testes. And then the vas deferens, or the seminal vesicle. The ductus deferens basically attaches the testes down here to the urethra, goes up and over the pelvis and into the urethra. And then there's the penis, and we'll talk more about it later. And then the scrotum, of course, is the sac that encloses the testes. This is a posterior view of the male reproductive system. So if you were looking at it from behind, so here's the bladder, seminal vesicles, prostate gland, which is cut, which would come around three-dimensionally towards you here. The vas deferens here, if you've ever heard of the term vasectomy, this is the tube. Both of these would be cut and tied back to prevent release of sperm, to prevent pregnancy. Okay, so this would be another good diagram to check out as you're studying and trying to learn the different structures. One other thing I would suggest too is right now, just pause the video for 5 minutes and go back and try to memorize where each of these structures are going to be located and what they are. Okay, we'll talk about what they do here in a moment, but I would take a few minutes and stop the video and just kind of acquaint yourself with some of these structures and look over them and help it make sense in your own thinking. Okay, so when a male fetus is developing in the womb or the uterus, the testes begin up here near the kidneys. Okay, so as baby is developing, okay, little tiny baby boy hasn't even been born yet. As he is developing, the kidneys sit way up here. Remember, they're way up high in the abdominal cavity near the back. Here's the backbone. Okay, here's the stomach. The testes are going to start up here, and then about a month or two before birth, the baby is going to start to produce testosterone, and that testosterone is going to trigger the descent of the testes down and end up into the scrotum. Okay, so one of the things that pediatricians will check baby boys for, basically every visit to the doctor for well visits and so forth, is to see if the testes have descended, because if they do not and they get stuck up here in the pelvic cavity, the temperature up there is too high and it can cause damage, and that child may not be able to have children, or there could be other damage to the testes. So it's important that they actually descend and stay descended. If not, they'll have to have surgery. But the testosterone is going to trigger the events that cause them to drop down through what we call the inguinal canal. There's like a little canal through here where they can go over the pelvic bone and down into the scrotal cavity. Now there's a piece of connective tissue that will help. It shortens and actually pulls them down. That's called the gubernaculum. They go through the inguinal canal, and then after they descend down into the scrotum, the spermatic cord, okay, or this kind of the structure here. Let me see if I can, here's an example of it. This whole structure here is called the spermatic cord, and it's going to contain the vas deferens, which is also called the ductus deferens, the blood vessels and the nerves, and also some other muscles that we'll talk about, that basically attaches to the testes and helps supply them with nourishment, provides them with nerve stimulation, and so forth. So the structure of the testes themselves is going to have some different layers to it. Covering the testes is what's called the tunica albuginea. And it's basically kind of like you know how the kidney has a capsule? Same kind of thing, a tough fibrous layer that wraps around each of the testes. The testes also have, and it's usually white in color, the testes also have some different compartments called lobules. There's the seminiferous tubules, and then the cells of Leydig, or interstitial cells. And the seminiferous tubules within the testes are going to be about 27 1.5 inches long. So if we jump to this slide here, all of these little squiggly lines here, if you were to, those are the seminiferous tubules. If you were to stretch them all out, they'd be over 2 feet long. And this is going to be the place where sperm cells are produced. Okay, that's where they're made, in the seminiferous tubules of the testes. So that's an important fact to remember. And then also there's some special cells in the testes called the cells of Leydig, or the interstitial cells, and they're going to produce testosterone and other male hormones. Okay, so you know that the testes produce hormones, and they produce them in these interstitial or cells of Leydig. Okay, so here's the spermatic cord containing the vas deferens, muscles, nerve, and blood vessels. Okay. But if we look down here in those seminiferous tubules, if we take this tubule to see how they've cut that section there, now it is a tube, okay? Just like the esophagus or the small intestine, it's a tube. And if we look at a cross section of the, excuse me, of that tube, here is the lumen, okay? So remember, the lumen is basically like the hole, right? So the layers around the lumen is where sperm are going to be produced. And as they mature, okay, these are very immature sperm cells in here. As they mature, they're pushed to the center of the lumen, and then they travel down the seminiferous tubule till they get to the epididymis, and we'll talk about that here in just a second. Over here's a microscopic view. Here's some of those hormone producing cells. And then you can see the outside of the tubule here. And these are also going to be maturing sperm cells in here, and the more mature ones are there in the lumen. Another group of cells you might have noticed here are sustentacular cells, and sustentacular cells basically help nourish and support those developing sperm cells. They're going to provide nourishment and be there to kind of help support their maturation until they get released. Okay, so here's another thing that I'd like for you to know is the process of sperm formation, and that's called spermatogenesis. Okay, spermatogenesis is basically the process that, it's defined down here, but it's the process that makes the sperm. Okay, so you're going to start out with what I would call, in parentheses or quotations here, quote unquote, the parent cell. Okay, the spermatogonia is going to undergo mitosis. It's going to divide and produce a primary spermatocyte. That's going to divide and produce secondary spermatocytes, which are going to produce spermatids or spermatids, sometimes it's pronounced, and those will produce spermatozoa, which are immature sperm cells. Okay, and that process includes meiosis. Okay, so now there's two terms here. There's spermiogenesis, which is basically the maturation process. Okay, spermatogenesis is basically spermiogenesis plus all of the other meiosis. It's the complete, the whole process. Okay, spermatogenesis is basically the whole process that begins here on the outer edge and completes to the major sperm or the mature sperm. Okay, spermiogenesis is just basically taking the spermatid and maturing it. Okay, so here's what it would look like. You would start out with a spermatogonia, which I'm not sure why they didn't show it, but it will undergo mitosis, and it will split in half, and one cell will remain a spermatogonia. And the other cell becomes a primary spermatocyte that's going to be used to make the sperm cells. Okay, so the parent, quote, parent sperm cell, the spermatogonia, is going to divide in half through mitosis. Through mitosis, you get two cells at the end. One of those cells is what we call the primary spermatocyte that's going to go on to divide through meiosis and produce the sperm cells. The other one's going to remain a spermatogonia, so then later it can divide and produce another spermatocyte and remain as a spermatogonia. So basically kind of keeps at least one spermatogonia there to continue on sperm production. Okay, so the primary spermatocyte is going to undergo meiosis, and it's going to, in meiosis 1, for those that remember that process, you're going to get the secondary spermatocyte. This is going to then undergo meiosis 2 and produce 4 spermatids. Okay, and these are kind of like the immature sperm, which are then going to go ahead and develop out and produce the mature sperm. Okay, these basically mature into sperm cells. So one primary spermatocyte has undergone meiosis to produce 4 sperm cells. So, excuse me, every one of these produces 4 sperm cells. Okay, and this just shows that process of spermatogenesis. Here's our seminiferous tubule in the testes. If you take a look at this little orange piece here, that's what we're looking at, is in a cross section. Okay, you start out with the spermatogonia, divides into the primary spermatocyte, secondary spermatocyte, spermatids, they're maturing, and now here are the mature sperm cells. So as they get closer to the lumen of the tubule, they begin to mature, and then those sustentacular cells are providing nourishment and support during this whole time. Okay, so a mature sperm has some different structures to it, and as you can tell, it kind of looks like a tadpole on a microscopic size, and it has a head, and in that head is the nucleus of that cell. So it's one cell. Okay, just like a nerve cell or a muscle cell or any other type of cell, it's one cell, and the nucleus is found, excuse me, in the head. And again, it has 23 chromosomes, so that when it combines with the egg or the oocyte, 23 plus 23 would give them the correct number of 46 chromosomes for the offspring. Another thing in the head is a cap called an acrosome. And it's basically a covering over the nucleus, over the head of the cell. And it has enzymes that are going to be important when we talk about fertilization. Those enzymes are going to help penetrate the oocyte. It's going to break down the edge of the oocyte so the sperm can get in and penetrate and fertilize the egg. Then there's a mid piece. Okay, so here's the head. There's a mid piece and a tail. So the mid piece is where there's mitochondria. Remember, mitochondria are the powerhouses of the cell. So the sperm, once they get inside of the female, they're going to have to start swimming. And so the mid piece is going to provide the ATP or the energy for the sperm to start swimming. And then the tail is basically going to whip back and forth to propel the sperm, hopefully in the direction of the egg. Okay, and this is an actual microscopic view of some of the sperm. And then you can see here how each of the sperm begin to develop, or that sperm begins to develop. Okay, so that was the male gonad, right? The testes. Okay, so the testes here and here, made up of seminiferous tubules. So once the sperm, let me go back here, are produced, and they leave through here, they're going to head toward the epididymis. Travel down the seminiferous tubule toward the epididymis. Okay, now all of these are plural. So epididymes is plural. Ductus differentia is plural. But the ductus differentia is also called the vas deferens. If you remember, epididymes singular is epididymis. So take just a few minutes and pause the video and look through all of these internal accessory organs. Okay, testes is the primary sex organ, or the gonad. The internal accessory organs are all on this diagram. And again, we're looking at this from a posterior viewpoint, from the back side. Okay, so pause, take a few minutes and look at these different structures, and then we'll come back and talk about them. Okay, so the epididymis is a bunch of coiled tubes on the top of the testes. Okay, it connects basically the testes and the vas deferens, and it's a place of maturation for those sperm cells. Okay, and one thing that you might find interesting is peristalsis. Remember that from the digestive system, that point A to point B rhythmic movement? That will move the sperm along through the epididymis. And that's going to be important because the sperm are non-modal, means they can't move until ejaculation, or until they leave the body. Okay, so they're going to rely on peristalsis to be moved by the organs through the body. Okay, so that's the epididymis, again, site of maturation, and just kind of pushes the sperm through down to the vas deferens, or the ductus deferens. It is about a 17-inch tube. Again, if we go back here, it goes all the way down from the bottom of the testes up around the pelvis and to the urethra. So it's about 17 inches long. It's a muscular tube. Again, going to do that peristalsis movement. Let's see. And then as we get up here on the back side of the bladder, the next gland that the male reproductive system entails is the seminal vesicle, or also called the seminal glands. And these are right here behind the bladder. Okay, they're going to secrete alkaline fluid, which helps maintain pH. The female reproductive tract is rather acidic, and so that alkaline fluid helps neutralize the pH and give the sperm a better chance to live. They also secrete fructose, which is a sugar that provides energy for the sperm while they're on their journey to find the egg, and also prostaglandins, which I'm going to write up here, which prostaglandins, remember, is a paracrine secretion that's going to stimulate contraction in the female to help move sperm toward the egg. Okay, so there's a paracrine secretion, there's an alkaline secretion, there's some energy and fructose to help the sperm survive. And this is, if you think of semen volume, which is about a teaspoon, most of that volume comes from the seminal vesicles. Now the next gland is going to be the prostate. Okay, it's not prostrate, that means to like lay down. to get prostrate on your in front of someone or whatever. This is the prostate, okay? So that's how it is pronounced. And it is going to surround the urethra just underneath the bladder. It has some glands that open up to the urethra as well. And it's going to secrete a thin, milky, alkaline secretion that helps with sperm motility. So it basically kind of thins out or waters down the semen, and so it allows this sperm to swim more freely and also helps with counteracting the acidic pH. Your book talks about prostate cancer, which is pretty common in men. So if you're interested in that, you can read about that. So here's the prostate. Again, it's surrounding the upper portion of the urethra underneath the bladder. Okay, the next gland is the bulbourethral gland, or also called the Cowper's gland. And it's going to secrete some mucus-like secretions that's going to lubricate the end of the penis for copulation. And that's usually released before ejaculation. And so semen is basically the fluid that contains sperm and then the secretions from all those accessory reproductive organs. So sperm from the testes, as we saw, secretions from seminal vesicles, prostate, and bulbourethral gland. Semen's going to be slightly alkaline, contain prostaglandins from the seminal vesicles, nutrients from the seminal vesicles. It's about a teaspoon in volume, and per milliliter, and there's 2 to 5, there's 120 million sperm per mil in an average situation. And they do not begin to swim until they're mixed with these secretions, basically at the time of ejaculation. Okay, so those are the internal organs. So for the test, make sure you kind of classify which ones are internal, which ones are external. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. There's really only 2 external organs to the male reproductive system, and that's going to be the penis and the scrotum, which is the sac that surrounds the testes. Let's see. The scrotum includes what's called the dartros muscle. It's going to contract and relax along with the cremaster muscle, which is part of the spermatic cord, to help regulate temperature. For optimal sperm production, they need to be produced about 5 degrees below body temperature. So based on external conditions, these 2 muscles will raise and lower the testes to get them closer to body heat to warm up, or farther away from the body to cool off. Okay, so it'll raise and lower them to try to help maintain them at that 5 degrees below body temperature. The penis, like we said, has the urethra, and that urethra conveys urine and semen both. And it's specialized for intercourse, obviously, to deliver those sperm as close to the egg as possible. And it's going to have some different structures that make up the penis. First is the body, or the shaft, and it's made up of what we call erectile tissue, or specialized tissue that can allow the penis to become erect or engorge with blood. There's 2 columns called the corpus cavernosa and one called the corpus spongiosum. And we'll show you where those are in here in a second. And then there's the glans penis, which is basically the end of the penis. And then there's the prepuce, or also called the foreskin, that covers the glans. And if a patient has been circumcised, that prepuce will have been removed. Okay, so if you take a look at a cross section of the penis, here is the urethra on the bottom side traveling through here. It's going to be surrounded by corpus spongiosum erectile tissue, and then on each side above here, we're going to have corpora would be plural, corpora cavernosa erectile tissue. And then there's blood supply and nerves on the top layer. So just really quickly on the process of erection. During stimulation, the body, through the parasympathetic nervous system, releases nitric oxide. And that nitric oxide is going to dilate the arteries in the penis. So an erection is caused by an increase in blood flow, basically by blood in those erectile tissues. And so those arteries are going to dilate. We're going to bring more blood to that area. And then as that blood pressure and the dilation of those arteries increases, the veins become compressed. Okay, so these arteries will dilate, and they'll basically expand out here and really compress the vein to really hold the blood in that area, because the vein's not going to be able to send the blood back to the body at a fast rate like it did before. So it'll kind of quote unquote trap some of the blood there to maintain the erection. Let's see. And then basically the end of the sexual response is orgasm. And that comes with two processes. One is emission, which is the semen moving from the epididymis to the seminal vesicle, or I'm sorry, through the seminal or by the seminal vesicles, but to the urethra. Okay. And then ejaculation is the semen out of the body. Okay, so emission is going from epididymis to the urethra. Ejaculation is going from urethra out, and it's going to be driven by the sympathetic nervous system. Okay, so here is a recap on the function of each of the structures, both internal and external. Remember, this is the primary male sex organ, and these are all accessory organs. Or gonad is also called, so this might be a good table for you to review. And the last thing I was going to talk about just quickly was hormone control with male hormones. Okay, so we just finished up the endocrine system, and we did skip the male part of that and the female part of with the reproductive hormones. So we'll talk about these just real quick. Male reproductive hormones, like a lot of hormones, are controlled by the hypothalamus, anterior pituitary, and also the testes. Okay, these male hormones are going to start and maintain sperm production, and then also be involved with developing as a young man goes through puberty and maintaining male sex characteristics. Let's see. So the hypothalamus is going to detect the changes, and let's just take a look at this slide right here as we walk through that. So the hypothalamus is going to determine if there's a need to produce male hormones or not, or to release them, I should say. It will send GnRH, or gonadotropin releasing hormone, to the anterior pituitary. Okay, the anterior pituitary will then release follicle stimulating hormone or luteinizing hormone, or both, to the bloodstream. Those will travel to the testes. Those interstitial cells, or the cells of Leydig in the testes, will then produce testosterone and other androgens, which are male hormones. And those will be released into the bloodstream, and they will basically cause those male characteristics, okay, and then also kind of drive sperm production as well. And then there are androgens and another hormone called inhibin, which will tell the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary, hey, we got it under control, we don't need any more male hormone released. Okay, so that's kind of the same, the process there. It's negative feedback, going to be used to turn that process off. We go back here. So GnRH goes from the hypothalamus to the anterior pituitary. Anterior pituitary will release luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone, and then those cells inside of the testes will basically stimulate sperm production or secondary sex characteristic maintenance of the male, and so forth. And it will do its job. Male sex hormones, as I mentioned, are called androgens. The interstitial cells produce the androgens, and a little bit in the adrenal cortex. Testosterone is the most important male androgen. Secretion of testosterone begins during fetal development, which helps bring the testes down and descend into the scrotal area. And it continues till several weeks after birth, and then it basically stops during childhood until puberty. And then at puberty, it continues out throughout the lifetime. So testosterone production will decrease as a man gets older and older. However, men can produce sperm basically their whole life. Okay, they can remain fertile pretty much their whole life, assuming they don't have any other health complications that would affect that. When we get to the female ability to reproduce, that ends at what we call menopause. And so women are not fertile throughout their whole life, but males are, and it's because testosterone is going to be produced basically from puberty all the way through the end of life. Okay, so actions of testosterone at birth help descend the testes and also develop the male reproductive organs, okay, to make the boy a boy. During puberty, okay, so then after birth, after a very limited time period, testosterone will pretty much stop. And then during puberty, it will start to be produced again, and you will get enlargement of the testes and the male organs. These would be primary sex characteristics, that reproductive organs grow in size. And then there are some secondary sex characteristics, like growth of body hair, facial hair, chest hair, things like that. Sometimes decrease in growth in the scalp hair. Their voice will change. The larynx will enlarge, and the vocal cords will thicken, and sometimes it's really noticeable when that happens with a young man. Their voice will change, their skin will become thicker, they'll become more muscular, and their bones will become thicker and stronger. Talked about that one, and that is all. I'm going to be looking, there is 1 or 2 videos that I'm going to have you guys watch today after you finish this video. And then don't forget the Connect homework and the test coming up on the 20th. Okay, so again, if you have any questions or need anything, let me know. And please also fill out that SurveyMonkey survey, and we will talk to you again next time about the female reproductive system.